Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion, Key Trends in the Automated Software and Security Testing World. We just thank you for, again, your attendance today. I'm going to have several panelists with us that are going to really hopefully enlighten you and give you some really good things to think about as it comes to these key trends. So with that, actually, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel today. So I'm Matt Clausen, I'm VP of Marketing for Parasoft, and I will be the host and moderator for today's presentation. We also have with us a guest, Chris Rommel, who's Executive VP at VDC Research. And in fact, we will be featuring some of the research that VDC has done on these topics of automated testing in both embedded as well as in the enterprise, with a little bit more focus on the embedded space, as well as how that relates not just to testing quality, but compliance and security as well. In addition, we have Mark Lambert on, who's our VP of Strategic Initiatives here at Parasoft, and then finally Arthur Hicken, our Chief Evangelist at Parasoft as well. So why don't we go ahead and turn on the cameras? I'll stop presenting, and let's get into our discussion for today. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to Chris, Mark, and Arthur. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get into the material. So, the demand today for digital everything is continuing to accelerate. There is a ton of complexity as it relates to developing any kind of a product, that especially those that have software embedded in them. And as we think about software development, right, the world has continued to move towards a continuous way of delivery, and DevOps practices where automation is really at the heart of everything that we're doing in terms of trying to go faster while maintaining quality. I think sometimes there's a bit of a gap there. We'll talk about that during this panel discussion. So I'm really excited to get into this material because ultimately there's a bunch of different competing, I think, demands in the market. There's some really interesting trends that are impacting how we deliver software, and maybe more specifically how we test and ensure quality in software, both in the enterprise and embedded segment. So Chris, maybe you could lead us off, just kind of talk a little bit about some of the key trends you're seeing that would be relevant to anybody listening today.
Yeah, so well, first off, thanks very much for having me, being part of the conversation today. As I think at least everyone on the Parasoft side knows, this is a market I've been looking at for a really long time. So better part of I guess approaching 2 decades now. And there's been certainly a lot of change over that time, but one really consistent theme that is at the heart of the demand and need for automated testing tools is really this incessant and perpetual push for development organizations to produce more software faster. But now there is this underlaying, or this foundation of additional pressure on them with additional security concerns, and ultimately in a number of sectors, whether or not you're looking at the enterprise or you're looking at the embedded space, more and more end corporate value in terms of the interfaces with those customers are being driven by software. So there's that much more risk for organizations related to latent software defects or security issues. And so that's often at the heart of why many organizations are reevaluating the different technologies they're using to ensure the quality of the software they're making. That's has also helped continue to foster demand and interest in different security and process standard compliance process standards in the industry as well, which, especially when you look at the IoT and embedded industry, is another really significant driver of spend and need for organizations to try to, forgetting about meeting their corporate needs, but also just maintaining compliance to industry initiatives. And so those are some of the biggest issues. And another undercurrent, especially in the enterprise space, is tied back to that theme of the speed of development, and that's agile and DevOps. And again, it's also not just trying to accelerate testing or quality assurance left or things like that. I mean, those are principles we've been talking about for a long time in the industry, particularly in static analysis, but it's trying to do that in a way that ties in the entire organization and also just involves more and more roles into this process, because there are so many organizational stakeholders that have a vested interest in software quality. And so with that, I guess, broad swath and context, we've seen what is really quite a mature market continue to grow. And not trivial growth either, but organizations investing more and more in what they recognize is an absolutely critical point of not only risk mitigation, but ultimately differentiation, if they can ensure that their software products function well and that they can ensure that those end users, whether it's in the form of a product or in a B2B enterprise software setting, are going to be having a consistent experience and one in which that they can trust the outcome, before they ship that product software.
So I don't know, Arthur or Mark, you just want to chime in anything to that before I go on?
I was just going to say, I've worked with Mark for eons, and he's fond of saying things like, you can have quality, speed, or security, pick two, right? And that is our challenge now, that we have to move fast in many places. We have to have frequent updates, and it has to be at least a certain level of quality and reliability. But if it's not secure today, then you're ending up in the news, right? I mean, every day there's some big major security problem in the news. So you can't make these choices like that anymore.
No, and I think Chris, you touched on it really well. Is like, software really is the frontline interaction for almost every organization out there today, whether it's just going to a website or creating an account and having the company that you're dealing with kind of managing your data, or whether it's an embedded device with software in your car. And we're all striving to deliver faster, to learn from the market, get feedback quicker in the process. The whole point of Agile is actually to learn, to say, okay, is this the right thing? Is it working? But as you say, Arthur, it's like you can't now choose like a couple of these. You have to be able to deliver all of them. And as you're now pushing further out to the edge, especially in an IoT world, security is, quality, you can sometimes like say, okay, well, these parts of the system I can kind of live with having varying scales of that. But when you're talking about security, it's kind of like it's a binary thing, right? You're either secure or you're not, and that's what grabs headline news at the moment. It's outages are obviously a big issue, right? That's a big quality concern, but security is always going to get you frontline, headline news, even if it's actually not that big of a security issue at the end of the day, but the media love it, right? So yeah, I think that kind of touches the whole market, right? Both embedded and enterprise sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys touched on a few interesting trends around obviously speed, right? Agility and speed, and some modern practices of development. But as I talk to customers, as I kind of try to keep a pulse on the market, I still get the sense that even though we've been talking about big concepts like shift left, continuous quality, continuous testing for quite a while, it still seems like there's a gap. In other words, if companies had a choice of speed or quality, I feel like many organizations tending to choose speed over quality, or what are your thoughts? I mean, is quality and our quality practices actually lagging in the real world? And maybe even touch on specific areas where maybe this is more prevalent than others.
From my perspective, quality is always somewhat negotiable within an organization until it's not. So I think of there being as kind of like three primary drivers there. You've got compliance is a big driver. It's non-negotiable. The quality practices are essential for you to achieve compliance, especially in safety critical industries. ISO 26262 for automotive as an example. And you can't, in those workflows, you can't bulk quality and compliance at the end of the process, because if you do that, you're not going to be able to accelerate your deliveries. The secondary areas we just talked about is security, for the obvious reasons that we just touched upon. And then the third is where it really affects the operation of the business. So this is where, am I talking about, the key operations of the business that's going to stop me from being able to perform transactions? Is it going to cause outages of services? These are the types of things which actually quality becomes non-negotiable, which is why you kind of start looking at it at a broader kind of application across different parts of the portfolio. But I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah. So I think your comment about quality being, kind of negotiable or up for interpretation is certainly something that rings very true, and it brings to mind this really interesting point of data correlation I saw in some of our research, and I've seen it, many times over the years, where we'll ask a question in one of our surveys of developers where we say, we ask them to do a self-assessment of security risk and comparing to past projects. And I guess no surprise generally that there's a directional increase in security exposure. I mean, I think we understand that to be true. But then when you ask those same set of people, what they're doing differently, it's really generally only about a third have said that their organizations have changed anything in terms of, people, processes, or tools. And that goes back to your point where it's like, yeah, they know it to be true, but is it going to force them to do something? If it's not something like compliance, if it's going to cost more money in particular, something that's not budgeted and you're not just carrying things forward, then that becomes a challenge. And as you rightly noted, regardless of perhaps the magnitude of the tangible impact on the back end when things are in the news, that's real. That hurts brand, and in many cases there is a cost impact, whether that's lost sales or an operational impact when people decide not to change anything. So I think that's one of the toughest things where, unfortunately, it takes a leap of faith and an understanding that you need to invest, but very often there's not that follow through, just in the way that people budget for their solutions. It's an unfortunate dynamic that I know that I'm preaching the choir here a bit, but that's clearly something we need to continue to work to help people feel comfortable going to their colleagues and evangelizing for the need for investment in the things we know will save them money in the long run.
Yeah, you got me thinking about something. So as Arthur mentioned, we've worked together for over 16 years now, and Arthur predates me by a significant amount at Parasoft. And when I joined Parasoft, we were evangelizing static analysis, right? Which is just, it's a no-brainer, right? You plug it right in, you can capture the catalysts, but and I still felt we're still evangelizing, and it's like, just do the basic pieces. And the good news is that organizations are looking at things like this. You look at the modern pipelines like Git, GitLab, GitHub. There's a number of technologies that build into those pipelines which make it easier to embed things in. But organizations still struggle with, I've turned it on, but I'm getting overwhelmed. I don't know how to kind of really make it effective. And I know, Arthur, you talk about that a lot, with different folks.
I was going to say, we're kind of on the cusp of a change, right? Like, yes, I feel like I've been spinning this static analysis record for 30 years, right? And in some sense, I go, oh my gosh, nothing's ever changed. But the truth is, the conversations have changed. And the conversations used to be, do I even need to do this? How is this different than a linter, right? Questions like that. And we don't get that question very often anymore. We only get it from immature organizations. But we have moved up the maturity index where people are now going, but what and why and how can I do it effectively and efficiently? How can I fully adopt it? And there have been problems with trying to adopt it at scale, right? Like, and not just the performance, but just the sheer number of things come out. And that's where, new techniques, AI, ML, analytics, and things to help you get to the right things. And in my experience, like, the biggest missing connection for people has been an understanding of, why am I even fixing this stupid static analysis thing, right? Like, it's easy for those who step back and look at it academically to say, oh gosh, that's a thing that later will lead to a thread synchronization problem and a crash. But to a developer at the moment, without having something that tells them exactly what's going to happen, it's pretty easy to say, I don't care about this, right? So that's where we're at in that maturity, right? As people are adopting, trying to use the feedback loop in CI so that we can correlate the static analysis we execute against the things that are happening either to us or to our competitors.
Yeah.
I love it when something happens to a competitor. My next question is, would that happen to me? and then do something in its place.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
going back to that message of how things have changed or not, right, over your time period in the space, Arthur, and you know, as we look back, and again, we've been talking about, you know, driving static analysis of the developer's desktop for, you know, for a long time to try to accelerate defect detection. But you hit on what I think is a really important difference now in the market, and that is that feedback loop, you know, where you can tie or do that pragmatic evaluation, understand the impact and why things need to be addressed, and why things can't just remain latent, and why, yes, you need to prioritize that level of mitigation. So, you know, I'm certainly hopeful that's going to continue to drive, you know, increasing use cases and pickup when on something, as we mentioned, that, you know, we've known adds a lot of value for a long time.
Yeah. So I mean, if we dig in just a little bit, right? So you know, I was a developer for many years, and I will tell you, I did dislike testing, and I think many developers, they don't get into development because they like testing. It's, you know, they like solving problems, and, you know, again, obviously, and they want to, you know, get the code written, etc. But, you know, so the question is this: is this a cultural issue more or an automation issue? I mean, are the tools to the point where when people talk about CI/CD, right, and their CI/CD pipeline and the tool chain that goes with it, right, DevOps tool chain, et cetera, right, are they really without excuse from a technology standpoint? I mean, can we make this automated and easy for developers so it actually just kind of works and they're given the information they need? Or do we have a tool problem as well? Like in other words, is it the environment? Is it the automation? Is it cultural? You know, and what, you know, kind of what combination? So I don't know. Anybody can answer that one. This is a little off script.
I would say a little of column A and a little of column B, right? If the tool is, let's just say, perfectly sound, right? It's no false positives, no false negatives, and you give results to a developer without any context, they don't know why they're fixing what they're fixing. And it's a funny industry. When the electrician shows up at my house, he doesn't argue over the gauge wire he's required to use. But in the development industry, we argue every single decision. And so I think that there are tools out there that can work very well for developers, and there are tools out there that really don't. That don't think about the user experience, but the developers need enough context to tie it back to what is this. Again, if I look at, you know, any arbitrary, you know, code analysis finding, static or dynamic, developer's going to argue it. If I can say, hey, remember last week when that company blah blah was in the news? This is that thing. And that's really powerful. And that's why that feedback loop that Chris talked about is the way to get there. Because yes, there are tools, we are maturing, we do a better job at getting the right results, we do a better job at scaling, we do a better job at finding more kinds of problems, but you have to change the culture, both in the sense of you need to just do this, and also in the sense of giving them the context so that they're able to ask the question instantly internally, why am I doing this? What will it lead to?
Yeah, I agree. It's very, you know, it is kind of a chicken and the egg thing, and or, you know, drawing against both those issues. You know, so that the power of inertia is strong, you know, in development organizations generally, right? But especially so when you look at embedded software development. Right? You know, that people have been doing things a long time. It's a much more heterogeneous landscape as well, which kind of perpetuates prior decisions, whether or not you're talking about language use or, you know, OS use, process use, you name it. It's not as simple as it is on the enterprise. I don't mean simple, but it's a much more diverse set of potential combination of technologies than it is in the enterprise space, which makes, you know, so there are a whole lot of subject matter experts have been focused on a certain niche for a long time, all the software assets are developed a certain way, And do anything different turns into kind of a religious war at times, which is a significant problem. So that's one side of the coin. I think the other is, even though the tooling landscape has evolved considerably, just because they're there don't mean they're necessarily available to those developers, right? For all those reasons I mentioned before. And again, especially with that concept or context looking at embedded development versus enterprise, it's always, years behind the adoption of new technologies in the enterprise space. Just the nature it is, especially when you're talking about safety critical devices, everything moves slower. And so you start to see that handcuff the rate of change at times in the industry. And it's really one of those reasons why I guess we need to do the things we do and continue to evangelize that, because that is slow. And we need people to recognize that, yes, you are right in thinking that XYZ tool can be quite helpful, and you need to, beat that drum to ensure you can get access to it. And we do see that come through in our research as well, where whether or not we pivot our data based on the use of agile methodologies or alignment with DevOps principles, there is a much higher use of, I'll call them more advanced, lifecycle management or development and testing tools. That whether or not it's static analysis or CI/CD, kind of you pick the category, and those developers that are aligning with agile, as an example, it's a much higher use rate of those tools than if you look at people that are aligning with just waterfall methods. I mean, you name it. So certainly the market's moving in that direction. It's just not where we want it to be, think collectively as an industry, or where these organizations rightfully need it to be in order to meet all their other objectives they have to advance the level of sophistication, the products and software they're producing at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's the need to do it continuously. I mean, I think the thing which an embedded industry has over an enterprise industry, quite frankly, is a regulatory compliance requirements, right? FDA requires you to do something, and they're actually getting much better. They're actually really understanding the software development process now. So your FDA audits are actually starting to look at the code, saying, okay, you're doing something, but what are you doing with it? You've got TUV cert, you've got, obviously doing compliance-driven stuff for all the safety critical industries in things like automotive. So I think embedded has that kind of like one up, right? But it's still kind of waterfall centric. I mean, the number of innovative startups in the automotive, especially the EV market, is amazing right now. But the number of them that we talk to where they're like, yeah, we've built this great thing, now we need to do compliance. How do we do that? I mean, like, no, you shouldn't be doing that at the beginning. But at least there's something that you can draw a line to. I think the workflow you talked about is critical. I think, Arthur, the context is critical. And one of the things that a lot of people miss is the thing that you're looking at is not necessarily a bug. It's a defect waiting to happen. So we're building in more code with more complexity. And if that code is not kind of well structured with a solid foundation to start with, you're building on top of it in such a way that it will become a bug. It's a catalyst later down the lines. I mean, when I joined Parasoft, prior to Parasoft, I was doing consulting work. I brought one of my code bases with me. I ran up our static analysis, and I immediately uncovered the parts of the code that I spent all my time debugging. I mean, literally, I looked at it and I'm like, oh, if I'd actually run static analysis, I would have cleaned the code rather than playing whack-a-mole. And I think that experience taught me the value of it. And unless you really have that contextual experience where you've gone back and gone, oof, that was a mess, and I created that, then you actually understand kind of like that context of something that you might say is not a defect today, but you can understand why it's going to bite you in the future.
And that's actually kind of an unsung value of static that we often forget. We think about static as being kind of a V&V process, right? Like we run it and it says there's nothing, so off you can go. But when you turn on a stricter set of rules, which seems counterintuitive, and it's nagging you, essentially. It's like if Mark had a senior developer sitting on his shoulder, just tapping him going, don't do it that way, don't do it that way. And I remember my first like real bite into not playing around, but like, here's a real code base, here's static analysis, and the bloody thing going, close all resources in a finally block, close all resources in a finally block, close all resources, like just over and over and over while I'm coding. Eventually the tool didn't find those anymore. Not that the tool got stupid, but that the nagging worked eventually, right? It changed my behavior. And that's an important part of static analysis, to act like a mentor and to tap you on the shoulder and annoy you and remind you until you start doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's the thing with cyclomatic complexity or other code metrics, right? Is just to say, hey, you're approaching a warning light, right? You've got a yellow light that keeps blinking, and you address it before it turns red, right? So
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Exactly.
So a couple things I want to dig into just a little bit. I think you guys making fantastic points. But if we come back to, I guess, the research, I think one of the things we want to do is kind of highlight some of the research from VDC. So we've all talked about reasons why companies are investing. We talked about maybe a little bit of differences between embedded. We'll come back to that in a minute in terms of kind of some of the differences across the industries. But what are you seeing? What are the primary reasons, and what are you seeing around growth? Is this a growth market? Are people investing more? Where are they investing more? Again, why are they selecting automated software testing tools like SAST or static code analysis?
Yeah. No, so I guess a number of layers to that. But so first off, if we just look at the automated testing tool market overall, you're talking about like a $2 billion market. It's significant. And it is much, in terms of spend, if you look at the top level again, there's a majority of that's on the enterprise side. It's actually flipped. And this is to Mark's point about where kind of embedded has advantage. But when you look at the static market, because of some of those issues, there is more spend today in the embedded side of things. And likewise, when you're looking at the static analysis tool market, I mean, you're looking at a market that's growing, it's 8% a year, which again, you're looking at technology that's been around for a long time. And it is, and that's revenue growth, not even user growth, which is at a faster clip. And so I think there's clearly a whole lot of need for those types of technology. And also, if you were to kind of double click down and look at the drivers and look at the for what's driving more and more spend, security comes at the top in terms of the use case and the allocation of spend against that. If we look at that lens, I guess slightly different in terms of drive versus static analysis and what is important in the selection of static analysis tools, you get like a whole litany of response, but I think it shows an important mosaic on the different points of value that they bring to the market. I mean, as with just about anything, normally one would expect overall cost to be at like the top of the list for one of these commercial solutions we asked about. This is a case when it actually isn't, which is a bit of an anomaly almost. And from the number of years I've been asking questions like this, and perhaps no surprise to you all, but impact on quality is cited as the most important reason for selecting a static analysis tool. And another thing that has changed over those years, and I just alluding to it, is this topic of security and its value and what it's driving. And now that has risen up the list. So that used to be at the bottom of the list. Again, people had, they were trying to just check against coding standards and what have you. Especially look at some of the traditional strongholds of static analysis and in the embedded marketplace. But now security has risen up that list, where I think it's the number 5. Which again, if you start thinking about all of those reasons of what's important for selecting a tool, not just in terms of value proposition, but what's important in selecting the tool, that's pretty huge. Also right at the top is just it's ease of use. So you've seen a lot in terms of the way people try to engage with testing tools, whether or not you're looking at as a service options in terms of delivery mechanism, or also, just as people look to go and have different options beyond kind of the command line, which again, you start thinking about, and again, that embedded context where, which I think is so interesting to talk about, that's kind of been where most people operate. And you start to see a really changing demographic in the way people engage with these tools. We talked earlier about the number of different stakeholders and reasons why static analysis adds value to an organization beyond just finding defects to improve product, functionality, and it's huge. And so we expect that a lot of those trends to continue. And another, I guess, maybe even a flip of what's to come. In the same set of research, when I asked what the leading development challenges were, it gave a kind of a different dynamic between the enterprise and embedded IoT respondents. And when I look at enterprise in IT, it's the responses were all about resources, which again, in that context of getting things done faster makes a lot of sense, and check that off being like, okay, like cost expected. With IoT and embedded, security was the #1 challenge that was cited for the development of their software products. And you start to then play that forward in terms of all the things they need to then invest in, and whether or not that's changing what runtime or OS they're selecting, or changing what testing tools they're using, or investing in automated testing. All of those things start to bubble up. And again, sometimes the unfortunate thing is the lag time for seeing that manifest in the use cases of some of these tools. As I mentioned, for all those reasons, like about before, I talked about the number of people that recognize security risk but don't do anything different, right? But ultimately, the pain gets so acute that you have to go see a doctor, right? And so I think that's what we're on the verge of seeing here, is in a market and a tool category that has been around for a long time, as Arthur and Mark myself have been talking about, there are these new catalysts for adoptions, new reasons why organizations need to invest further to ensure their organizational bottom line. And I think that's a really important catalyst and driver, as I look at the market and I think about it, and certainly that's one of the things that came forward in the research that we've been discussing today.
So Mark and Arthur, I mean, can you guys give us some examples from the market, or maybe again, you guys have a lot of experience working with selling to, if you will, solving problems in this market. But you can just comment on thoughts, but also if you have examples, it'd be great.
Yeah, I was going to say also, I just, Chris, I feel like you're always on the verge of a VI versus Emacs war, right? We're going to have like an hour-long discussion on what the right editor is. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I think the IoT and the security thing is really interesting, because even myself, I constantly fall in the trap that I think that, IoT, and I instantly think of, the doorbell camera and the home speaker and all the consumer stuff. But the truth is that there's this monstrous market full of industrial automation, and part of it's being used in grocery stores and Amazon warehouses and things like that. But a lot of it is being used to control things that affect our daily life, like gas pipelines, the local water treatment plants, electric things, stoplights in the cities, and it's an enormous risk and an enormous attack surface. And so I do feel like the home consumers at the moment are mostly more relaxed than maybe they ought to be. They're more comfortable with a lack of security than they ought to be. But the people running the local power plant definitely know that it matters, right? And recent events have made it very, very clear that it matters to us, right? The pipeline attack, right? That people can take over pieces of our country's infrastructure relatively simply based on stupid mistakes is frightening, and if it's not, it should be.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. It's the heavy asset industries, right? Oil and gas, telecommunications, utilities. They're rolling out IoT initiatives to really kind of enable cost optimizations around, let's say commercial refrigeration, right? So, you've got a cost optimization with saying, can I get a 10% gain from my power consumption, right? Can I get some savings there? Can I also optimize my maintenance schedule so that when I send somebody out to fix a commercial refrigerator, I know what they're going to fix? And these initiatives are really driving that cost optimization workflows, but there's a massive security challenge here. I mean, like, let's take oil rigs, right, or oil fields as an example, right? you walk up to an oil field. Arthur and I live in Southern California. They're all around Long Beach, right? These pumps are, they've got cameras, they've got security guards, they've got electric fences, and then they've got a connected digital twin with questionable security practices embedded in it. I mean, the impact of somebody, frankly, hacking my ring is not that big of a deal. Okay, I have them pointed on the outside of the house. So I'm like, hey, the worst thing for me or for Ring to be compromised is that my personal information gets out there. Well, guess what? It's already out there. People, somewhere has been compromised. The bigger concern is these heavy asset industries where they're not going to be able to optimize or deliver on their optimization strategies. But then, as you say, Arthur, is like critical infrastructure. And the industry as a whole, the reason why this is the #1 concern is that there aren't enough people that understand how to build a secure architecture, right? And organizations are struggling with getting access to human resources. I mean, they're being gobbled up by the Netflixes and the Facebooks of the world. And being able to put the correct guardrails in place and policies in place so that you can accelerate your deliveries while mitigating this security risk is the big driver for me. It's agile, it's DevOps, it's knowing that we can deliver new functionality or deliver new patches out there as quickly as possible. But if we don't have the quality processes built in, then we run the risk of delivering more insecure software out there.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember when we think about this is that the IoT is not new. Right? It's kind of it's been rebranded, but it's well past drinking age, right? It is we've had connected assets forever. Connected factories, not new. You talk about critical infrastructure. It's always been connected. But what has changed, right? Mark, as you mentioned, it's like things like digital twin, right? It's the interconnection and the additional layers upon layers upon layers that organizations are adding on top, and the amount of additional processes that are tied to them, where a single hack can now jeopardize so much of a value chain for an organization or for a public good, where it becomes a serious problem. And so I don't know if we always do these issues justice when we say, oh, it's connected. Well, it's not just connected. It's much more than that now, and that really is the problem, and why although we've had the connected assets and connected infrastructure, heavy industry, safety critical devices, however you want to talk about it, we've had those for a very long time. But now the stakes are much higher for when these things are being exposed, and the fact that there is just so much more surface area and ways for these things to become compromised, that organizations simply have to adapt at a rate much faster than they have been to date.
And those digital twins are they're hyper connected, right? Because they're connected into your enterprise processes. They're sending people on a truck to go and fix the device. They're ordering things from RPA has automated a whole bunch of workflows so things happen super quick. So yeah, it's gone from this, hey, I can talk to a particular device and get some simple telemetry, to saying, hey, that device is, when it finds a problem with itself, it's going to go and order a workflow, put a guy on a truck, and if that doesn't work right, you're going to have people completely blowing all of the plans that they have in place for that.
Yeah, and I think that interconnectedness is something that we probably are still understating, right? The fact that my car radio used to have no position in any form of ASIL, right? Like that, there's no safety integrity level to my car radio. And now, depending on how it's connected to the bus and what functionality is there, there's the obvious GPS things, but there's also remote engine start, right? Or steering control or braking control. And probably the best, most amusing example of this was a couple of years ago, someone broke into a casino in Vegas through a thermostat in a fish tank, right? And I don't know how to better represent that something tiny and silly and no one cares led to, multi-million-dollar problem. So this interconnectedness, the fact that the thermostat could reach a mainframe, okay, it's bizarre, right? Like why? But it can, right? That's the point.
Yeah. So clearly we could probably go on for quite some time with this discussion. I think it's been really, really good. I think we've hit a ton of important points, I think, for the audience today. But we are about out of time on the discussion, and we actually want to get to the audience questions. So before we get to the audience questions, let me just I'm gonna go ahead and if you guys want to switch cameras off just for a minute, then we'll get back to cameras when we go to Q&A. I'm going to share my screen. Report we've been talking about, you can access. Here's a QR code. Here's the title. You can use this QR code to gain access to the report. In addition, you can, if you want to talk to us about your specific challenges, anything related to what we talked about today, or just quality in general, whether you're in the embedded space or the enterprise space, whether it's static analysis or some other type of testing technology, you can use the other QR code to get in touch with us at Parasoft. And so with that, we're going to just take a moment. There might be a small pause here as we switch to the Q&A and kind of go through the questions quickly, and then we'll get into Q&A. So here we go to Q&A.